And this is not, stretching a point at all. It is simply to say that whether you're putting on a new roof, whether you're putting on new windows, whether you're putting on new doors, whether you're changing the boiler system, changing the lighting and the wiring to be more energy efficient, not only will make a significant contribution to the upgrading of these buildings, but will save us money in the long term. Every time you energy retrofit a building, there's going to be huge operating savings for us going forward. And so I believe that the combination of their participation in this end of it with quite a bit of flexibility and the federal government's participation and our continued participation will allow us to address all the different kinds of repairs, including the doors and windows and roofs and lights and boilers that are energy retrofitting, but also including other things that can be dealt with by the funds coming from other governments, meaning particularly the City of Toronto and the federal government. So I think this is a significant step forward. As I said, there is much more work to be done. The National Housing Strategy is yet to have been put in front of us in a final form, and the funding that will go with that. There are questions of supply and affordable supply. I think the Minister and I are likely to have more to say about that as the fall goes on in terms of some other very positive steps taken in their budget to make land available for affordable housing. This is a big file on which governments were heading in the wrong direction, a year ago, 2 years ago. Now I think we're all headed in the right direction, which is to actually work together to do something about this, to improve living conditions for the tenants of TCHC, but also to take very positive steps to increase the supply of affordable housing in addition to improving the stock of social housing.
One of the things that you have raised repeatedly about the housing file is the fact that Toronto's going to have to close some units in the next few years without adequate funding. Do you have any sense as to what this funding will do to that list?
I think my stated objective has been all the way through that while there were projections based on the state of disrepair of some of those units that we would have to close some going forward, it has been my determination to avoid doing that, with every ounce of determination that I have. This will help us a lot, I think. Again, some of those buildings don't necessarily need energy retrofits, but we can apply the money to energy retrofits where they are needed, where we might have had to replace a boiler without any help from the province, and then take the money we would have had to apply to that energy retrofit boiler to fix up a building and stop it from closing. So my objective remains the same. I do not find it an acceptable outcome in this City of Toronto at this point in our history, with the number of people who are looking for housing and living in substandard conditions, to be closing units, other than those like Firgrove, where it was a very particular example where we'd actually committed the money to fix them up, and then when the professionals went and looked at the buildings, they said, you're better off not to try and fix these because they're not fixable because they were poorly built in the first instance. So there will be some exceptions, but I hope they will be very limited and not caused by any decisions that have to do with lack of money, but rather if there are any units to be closed, it'll only be because we've reached the end of the line with those units and they can't be repaired. But I hope even that number can be kept to zero or to a very tiny number.
Mayor, how do you make sure, in terms of oversight, you get the most bang for the buck when it comes to repairs and minimizing disruptions for tenants?
Well, the minimizing of disruptions is obviously something that we have to focus on a great deal, and I know there have been even construction projects that are ongoing right now that, seem to take longer than they should. And I will tell you, this is going to be a very keen focus of mine, not confined to housing, in the next 12 months. And I've already indicated it with regard to parks. I believe that we have allowed our procurement process in a number of respects to become incredibly inefficient. We have allowed an obsession with taking the lowest bid to sometimes produce a result in which you get the lowest bid, yes, but you get shoddy workmanship or you get inadequate resources being brought to the job, so it takes too long. And so I'm going to be looking at ways in which we can regain public confidence on this, including with these housing expenditures, so that the public will know that we're getting the maximum amount done for the money we have, and that it's being done in a quality fashion as quickly as possible and with as limited disruption as possible. And that applies not only to housing, but I'm also starting in, as I have done already. I've had a couple of meetings already about parks where we've seen some examples where I just don't think people take sharp pencils and a sharp determination to the job of getting things done for the least amount of money as efficiently and safely as possible.
Mayor Tory or Councillor Bio, in April, Toronto Community Housing said it was going to have to close 400 badly needed homes because of lack of repair money. Is this announcement today going to reduce that number, which may be greater, you can correct me, at all? I don't get a sense.
I will just say from the top line, first of all, we found out about the details of this announcement yesterday, so now we have to sort of take the numbers and run them through all of the requirements we have for repairs to be done in the next couple of years, which led to that total. And I told you earlier, and I would repeat this, My determination is that we end up with as close to 0 units closed as possible, and that any that do have to be closed are only closed because they're not in a state where they can be repaired, as opposed to that we don't have the money to repair them. I just can't be comfortable at all with the notion of closing units down at a time when there's a drastic shortage of both social housing and affordable housing generally. And so I think it's premature to be able to say for sure, absolutely, those 400 that were talked about, fit within the category of being able to say they won't now be closed. But that's the objective, is to get to that number to 0 or as close to 0 as possible, with the only ones being above 0 being ones that just can't be repaired and that it's not practical to repair them. Do you want to add to that, Councillor?
I'll just add that Toronto City Council, when Tenants First was approved, passed a motion not to close any units. This is actually the work that has been done. The conversation with the province had started. This is the culmination of that. There is work that is going through the budget process as well. And our goal, and I think everybody's goal, is to not have units closed and to move together to get the problem fixed. This is a good beginning. It's not the end of the conversation. It's the beginning of the conversation.
Mayor, where do you come down on the debate over the school resource officer program?
I come down on saying that the responsible way to go about making an important public policy decision like this is to have a proper review of this. I was one of the first people after the consultations we did on anti-black racism to indicate that I had heard concerns expressed by parents and others about this program and exactly how it was playing itself out in some schools on some days, and that therefore a review was quite appropriate after 10 years of the program being in place. I do not believe it is responsible way to make decisions to just decide we should close the program based on the say-so of people who come to the Police Services Board and say that's their view. I believe what the Police Services Board is poised to do today is the proper thing to do, which is a thoughtful review done by an outside organization, in this case through Ryerson, which has a fulsome program of consultation included in it with members of the community of all different descriptions, with the objective being that we enhance community policing, that we enhance the relationship between the community, in particular young people, and the police. And if there are flaws in this program, which I acknowledge there probably are, then I trust that this study will identify those, and we will be able to make the changes to the program as appropriate. But I support the program, and I do not support people who show up at the Police Services Board and say that because they have concluded this program has flaws, which I acknowledge it may well, that therefore we should just close it and give up on it. I don't think that's the right answer. I think the right answer is to study it carefully and then reach a determination based on the results of that study.
Where do you stand on these new police cruisers? Councillor Shelley Carroll says the board still has not been consulted about this and it should go back to the drawing board. What do you think?
I think that we did prove in one respect that the process worked and that there was extensive public consultation undertaken. Thousands of people participated online. The chief, in bringing out the new car earlier in the week, took that advice in terms of what the public said, which is a greater predominance of white, for example, on the cars as they now exist. I think it might have been preferable for the report to have been considered by the board today and have the car wheeled out after that, but I do know that the members of the board were generally informed as to the results of the consultation undertaken, and that the chief then made a decision in that regard. So I think the good news is that there was a reconsideration of a decision that had been taken earlier with the grey cars, and that there have been changes made and that those changes are responsive to some of the concerns expressed by the public.
As for the transformational task force and the hiring freeze, where are we now in terms of that conversation?
Well, the hiring freeze was on and was always something that was going to be subject to review on an ongoing basis. And what we realized is that the number of people leaving the police service, in particular just to retire, was in excess of what our projections had been. And so we indicated on a one-time basis that there would be a very modest number of people that could be hired in the forthcoming year in order to make sure that we could keep the city safe and the police could do the job they have to do, and which they do very well, while we were in the process of modernizing the police service. And so, by and large, we're going to be heading on a continued trajectory to see the number of police officers reduced on a gradual basis. But as there are adjustments needed to make sure we keep this the safest city, as it was adjudged in the last few days in Canada, and I believe the safest city in North America, we will do what we have to do to make sure the city can be well policed while at the same time modernizing and meeting our budget objectives. None of those will be in peril as a result of these decisions that you make along the way, as numbers, for example, of those retiring exceed what had been projected.
Questions, if there are any?
just it sounded for a while like yourself and Mr. Milczyn were pretty long ways apart when it came to funding for social housing, at least in the comments that were put in the news. So I guess I would ask you guys then, are you guys cool now? Like,
I will just say that I've said all along, as regards the Premier, and I certainly can say this with respect to Mr. Milczyn, who is a former city councillor and a friend, and I met with him, I think, 24 hours after he was appointed as Minister of Housing, and I was delighted he was appointed because I knew, as an architect, as a past executive in nonprofit housing, and as a city councillor, a past city councillor, and as an MPP, he had a keen interest and a big heart when it came to the fate of people who live in Toronto community housing, and that it very much formed, as I said all along, that I knew it did, in the context of the Premier's views, a part of a fairness agenda that this government is talking about. And so I could tell from the first time we met, 24 hours after he was appointed, I think it was about 24 hours later, that we were going to be able to have more positive discussions with more positive results for the tenants of Toronto community housing, and that as long as I was prepared to put aside, and Councillor Bailão, and as long as others were prepared to put aside questions of jurisdiction and technicalities and politics for that matter, and just focus on the needs of these tenants in Toronto community housing, that we could achieve more than we had achieved before. And I think today is not the ultimate and overall answer, but I think it is a huge step forward to having us operate in a partnership. And that's what the taxpayers and the citizens and the tenants want. They simply want us to sort of get together, decide who can do what, and to get on with the job of making these repairs. And that's exactly what we're now going to do, with substantial new support from the Government of Ontario, support to come from the Government of Canada, and continued support from the City of Toronto.
Yeah, so I'll just add, the mayor and I are friends. I've supported him in all of his municipal campaigns. Just want to be clear about that. But the discussions between our government and the City of Toronto had been ongoing for years and many months. And today's announcement is the culmination of that first round of discussions. It is not the end of our common goal to improve social housing and build upon affordable housing in the city and this province. A lot of my work in the coming weeks and months will be working with my provincial and territorial counterparts and the federal government to make sure that the national housing strategy is delivered, to make sure that Ontario gets its fair share from that, and that it's structured in a way that allows communities to make the right decisions for the housing that they have to deal with. So we've constantly been working together, and certainly I, as minister, hit the ground running, had great conversations with the mayor, with Councillor Bailão, and we will get the job done.
Thank you very much.
Great.
Thank you.
Good stuff.
3 yellow.